I am a licensed therapist. I have a background in marriage and family therapy for my degree. I'm also a licensed sex therapist through the ASECT company. And if you don't know, that stands for American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. ASECT is just so much easier to say. I also am doing psychedelic therapy. And so not only do I specialize in sex and therapy for that, I also am specializing now in psychedelic therapy for anxiety, depression, sex related things as well. So kind of a little bit of everything.
What would you say you spend or who you spend most of your time with? Is it couples, individuals? Is there a particular niche of people that you see, or is it an even mix?
Yeah, so my specialty brings in a lot of, I work heavily with the poly and kink community, BDSM community. That does involve couples, that involves throuples, people in fours and fives, and a lot of individuals. So I would say it's kind of a mixed bag of how many people are in the room. I wanted a marriage and family therapy degree background for multi-systems use to help me with the different individuals in each of their lives.
Very interesting. Okay. I want to ask you, I'll ask this for individuals and then for um, relationships. Doesn't matter how many people are part of it. Um, for individuals, what would you say if there is a theme that you notice, a recurrent theme of blocks to having a sexually fulfilling life?
Yeah, for individuals who are experiencing anything kind of a block, a lot of it presents as anxiety or depression or a lot of that sadness. And a lot of it is because they're unable to find community of things that they also find interesting or unable to work through the shame that was um, given to them as a kid, just expressing themselves sexually. I think, not enough people talk about masturbation, not enough people talk about puberty, not enough people talk about just different sexual partners or positions or what kind of lube and condoms you need. So I think the purity culture has done a lot of really harmful damage to the world of how people get to know the one thing they walk around in every single day and what makes it tick. So individually, I think a lot of people carry a lot of what they didn't get when they were younger. And that shows up when you get older and you are able to make more choices for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's no secret that the younger we are, the more impactful those experiences are at forming how we see the world, how we interact with the world. And so, as you know better than me, it can take a lot of time to undo something that happened when someone was 7 years old, as opposed to if it happened when they were 35. Like what happened when you're younger, it really sticks.
Yeah. And a lot of that is due to the power dynamics that you don't know is happening. When you
Talk
have parents or guardians, they have a lot of power over your life, what you can do, what you can't do, who you can see, who you can't see, things are allowed to listen to, things are allowed to read, movies, music. And when things happen to you, you think it's your fault because the person who has the most power is at that time you believe that they're the correct ones, they are the ones in the right position. And in reality, it's often the opposite of your agency and your consent was taken away from you. And at 35, you know those things, but also that doesn't mean you don't feel shame over those things because for some people, they've never experienced what's it like to have a voice.
Do you ever see anyone who is some form of a sex worker or engaging in sex work?
Frequently, I have it just tends to fluctuate on the time of year and how many people I have, but I frequently have many folks on my client list that have professions that touch a variety of different types of work. They say that sex work is the oldest profession in the world, and it's very, very true because people are always needing a human connection. But with that connection, it goes back to power, it goes back to agency, it goes back to consent. And I think a lot of people are afraid of the power people can have when they realize that they are the ones that this is me. I'm showing up. It's 100%. It's not anybody else. that makes it an unknown factor, because people always want to learn other people, but the more you learn, the more you know you don't know, right? It's a very scientific way of thinking of like, the more you study something, the more you realize there's more to study. And I think humans are a lot like that, but humans like certainty. And so with this line of work, it's very uncertain what's going to happen. They don't know what's going to happen in the room. They don't know what kind of person that's going to show up. They don't even know how they might react to another body, right? But also there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt because people are told their whole lives that they're not allowed to do something like this. Yet in everyday work, everyone is selling their body. Doesn't matter what kind of work it is.
In some capacity, maybe you're doing manual labor, even if you're a store clerk, like you are exercising the use of your body to provide a service. Mm-hmm. Very interesting perspective.
Yeah, when you're a sex worker, you're the one in control though, and I think there's a lot of hesitation with that. It's just like, how can you control someone if it's their body? Does that make sense? Like, you're hired someone to stock shelves, and you're like, hey, I hired you to do this one thing, and there's many people who can do that, but there's only one person who can sell your body if that's your product. Mm-hmm. So marketing is in the hands of the person who is ownership of that. People can be really, really accepting, and then we have a new group of people come through and they're not so accepting, and that seems to change the mood of the culture and society. Some societies never went away from that. Some societies you can hold hands with your best friend and no one thinks you're dating, right? But in the United States, you hold hands, someone's immediately thinking that either they're a relative of yours, if there's a age difference, and there's a whole different conversation on that, or that you're automatically dating. And I think that through the use of technology, we're providing and we're able to get that. And I think more information can be really helpful. What type of information is the thing you have to be careful about.
Talk more about that.
Yeah, so it's just being discerning through the internet, right? You can Google anything that you want, but is it going to be the truth? Right. So a lot of it kind of comes down to education. And that's another conversation of social economic statuses, that like, do you have access? Do you have money? Do you have the ability? Do you have the time, right? People who have more money tend to have more time to learn and to dedicate their lives to a certain subject. But people who are just struggling to get by, very hard to be able to do all these extracurricular activities other than just eat and sleep and repeat and pay their bills. So is there access? Yes. Does everybody get access? No. I mean, the internet for some people, they don't even have that. Some folks don't have cell phones. So you don't want to just automatically assume, right, in our society that just because it's there means that everybody is dipping their hands into it and exploring it and getting to do so in such a safe way. But there are a lot of websites that are misleading on purpose, and ignorant can be bliss here, but also ignorance can be very harmful. And so it's just about, yes, it is evolving in a very good way, but it can also be rapidly doing the opposite depending on who your sources are.
And it gets a little compounded in this particular age where we have AI, which is moving at a almost alarmingly rapid pace. Really, yeah. What are your thoughts on sex tech and AI and how they're playing a role in our sexual evolution that's going on?
Yeah, that's always been a really interesting conversation and question, especially in the sex work just area, right? And therapy and healing and health practitioners. So AI machine learning, this is a part of access and knowing what to look for and getting educated, because a lot of the AI we're seeing is actually just machine learning. Mm-hmm. And machine learning is very different than AI, right? Artificial intelligence versus machine learning. Machine learning pulls from human resources. And again, humans are fallible. They will say wrong things. They will be racist. They will be sexist. In fact, we see a lot of that in healthcare now, as people are trying to replace therapy with just bots on the internet. And they're already finding and being sued for it that they're giving very poor advice. And that's because people are feeding into the myths and the lies that they think people should be doing. And machines can't pick up on human emotions as much as AI is getting there, right? They're starting to learn those kinds of things, but will it ever be a true replacement? I'm not sure. Also, can you use it for sex? Absolutely. Do people have sex with robots? Yeah, that's been on the news. I think a few someones have married a robot or something, and that's a hot topic. Is like, should that be allowed? Well, is he harming anybody, or is she harming, or are they harming anybody? And if the answer is no, then it goes back to, well, then who has agency and who has consent over those choices, right? It goes back to the person who's doing it. Is it harming their life? Who gets to make that choice? It goes back down to the moralities of that. So everybody has a different set of moralities, which is why there's a very vast different set of opinions on this topic.
I I'm really happy that you made that distinction between the um I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but basically there's real artificial intelligence. And then there's the human learned. What's the phrase?
Machine learning.
Machine learning, which is like the chat GPT
Yes.
and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then, but yeah, you're right, because that is a very good distinction to make. And I think that that's important for people to think about too. I actually heard recently, someone asked ChatGPT a question and it referenced a certain lawsuit. And that person, I think it may have been a real lawyer, thought it was a real lawsuit and used it as a reference for something. And it was
Yes.
not a real lawsuit. It was a fake lawsuit that ChatGPT either made up or someone had put into its algorithm somehow. Just to give an example.
I think the jury's still out on the healthiness of, can you replace love with a machine, and does that give you love back in such a way? Because there's another angle of like, does this machine love, is it able to challenge you? Is it able to help you grow? Is it able to help you think about the hard things in life? Because that's what a lot of partners do for you is, yeah, I recognize this is really hard for you. If they communicate about those kinds of things, how can we help with that? How can I change? How can I say this differently, right? Because a machine's only going to program what you say. And is that going to be the right response? Is that helping the person grow? I think is an entirely different arena of questions.
Using Live Jasmine as the example, let's say you have a model and a member, that is a transactional relationship, but it's still a human being. And so, like, I've interviewed members who have said, yeah, I learned how to talk to women, and I learned, I was able to see it from my wife's perspective because the model told me you can't just go up to a woman and tell her X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? And like, he was able to see that different perspective, but it was from a human feedback who has emotions and can say, if someone did that to me, it would really hurt my feelings, you know? And so that's where it's just interesting to me because it is this unique relationship. It's transactional. They're paying to communicate, but there are still components that are, I don't want to say real, but kind of very human. Just as a quick note, I one time did ask ChatGPT what its weaknesses were. I don't know why. And it basically said, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was more or less anything that has to do with emotional understanding or matters of the heart, it doesn't understand.
For kids, you can help them explore. You can teach them what shame isn't, right? You don't, parents are often kids' first bullies. And I think that leaves a lasting impact in a very negative way, for when they get older. So kids transitioning or even exploring different pronouns, there's no fully transitioned here. So like that should be clear. If you want to be a different gender, they're just your those are just your pronouns. They're not preferred pronouns. They are just pronouns, right? So there's a distinction there. It's like you don't have to have surgery to be someone else. Surgery is an option and is often a gatekeeper for people who don't have a lot of money also, but there's no fully transitioned. It's just, you are. There's an overwhelming amount of like science that supporting kids when this is something that's important for them.
Oh,
It reduces drastically the suicide numbers. It reduces, if you find out a kid's being called a different pronoun or name at school and you don't know, maybe there's a reason for that, but there's not that self-reflection that happens. Like, why don't I know? Like that question never happens. It's why don't you do something different, right? It's that telling them what to do and what to do with their body. And I think that like kids will learn to either trust you or not. And there's a really important moment that you get to choose of stepping up and saying, yeah, I will support you. Let's do this in a safe way. It's just like sex. Let's do this in a safe way. Let's talk about it. This is what condoms are. This is no different when kids are exploring different genders for themselves. This is no different when people are exploring different kinks. It's the same way. There's a lot of kink shaming. There's a lot of gatekeeping for just in a binary sense, men and women. It's like, are you woman enough? Do you have enough makeup? Like, are you skinny enough? Do you have a six pack? Do you have big arms and muscles? Do you go to the gym? There's gatekeeping everywhere, and how you feel about that and how the world feels to you. To kids specifically, there's a lot of power in the hands of those who are raising little ones. I think people are looking for connection everywhere, and the types of connections I think can vary greatly. And the fact that you can be anonymous online, I think, is a huge part of that. Because if you had to scroll and search and your face was attached and everybody could see it, I think that would change how people would be using their phones quite a bit. So I think there's a little bit of that also in there.
Yeah, to be honest, we see that on Live Jasmine. I think part of the reason that members are able to form these really quick, strong bonds with models is because of the distance that's inherent. The model doesn't know anyone they know, can't go back and tell someone like what they're into or whatever the case is. And if they have a really bad experience, they're just one click away from ending it. So it's like there's a safety there that causes members, I think, to open up more than they would if
Mm-hmm.
this person was more connected in their day-to-day life, or if there wasn't as much distance. It fascinates me that the distance causes them to come closer for whatever reason.
Yeah, it is. That's just, different strokes for different folks, right? That's sometimes just what works for them in that moment. And that's either something they want to continuously do or something that they don't. And it could be something that they're just exploring, and that hour was good for them, and maybe no more hours are good anymore after that, right? So I think it changes for a variety of reasons for sure.
My next question to you is, if you could give one message to everyone in the world about human sexuality, what would that message be?
I can give one message to everyone about human sexuality.
That
Embrace it. That's what I would say. I would say embrace it safely, consent, and agency given to all. So that means trusting that the other person is going to know what they need and be in communication.
Yeah, very well said. Would you say that human sexuality, how would you compare it to our other needs?
There's a lot of science, actually, I think, that would support this conversation. This particular question is that, everybody, I think, is familiar with the monkey that was raised with a mom and the monkey that was raised without a mom. And they saw well, they fared with their mother's connection, or this like wired thing they configured with fake fur, and they gave them a bottle. And the monkey that didn't have the mom but had the fake mom didn't make it. And I think there's a lot of science that supports somatically that human touch, in particular, like in a physical touch, that is actually very, very healing. It's very, very calming. It's a proven known thing. It's why mindfulness works. It's why people spend eternities and lifetimes is studying why it is, because there's something there. It's sometimes something that's very hard to describe, but I think that obviously through science is still exploring this, but just seeing it every day in people and seeing how the feelings are, if they're getting enough physical touch or if they're not getting any words of affirmations, with the different languages where you can be expressing intimacy and needs, which is why camming or sex workers in physical or in virtual forms can be very affirming, because it feels very nice. Someone sees you, they're witnessing you. And I think there's a lot of powerful feelings that can become who you are, and also can be felt with witnessing another person and like their humanity.
I think that's one of the most healing experiences that we can get as humans, is to be fully or feel even that we're being seen, heard, and accepted. And that's why, yeah, I can see, like you said, how these experiences with models or other forms of sex workers, when someone's sharing a vulnerable and maybe even secret part of themselves, and they get held in that place, that is so healing,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
I want to ask you if there's anything about your work, human sexuality, camming that we didn't talk about, but you want to share.
I mean, I want to share light and love and joy, and there's a lot of joy that comes through human sexuality, and I think that's just because that's one of the things we're not allowed to explore in depth. And I don't think there's not very many spaces that aren't created in secret that you can explore that, right? So a part of that is you have to go looking for it. It's not there, it's not out in the open to say, hey, this is something that you can totally do. Now, granted, some cities are better than that, right? There are gay neighborhoods for a reason because it feels good, it feels affirming. It's like, wow, I don't have to do anything different here. It's who you are, right? So there's a sense of freedom. So I mean, anything to mention is like there's a lot of freedom in discovering who you are and to embrace that and to find your community that can help you grow in a good way, in a healthy way, in a way that is challenges you, but not to the point that you feel discouraged. And if you do feel discouraged, say something, right? Find a set of values, honor yourself by following those values, by creating those boundaries. And I think that having a good homeostasis on that is um, key to just having your own checks and balances in your own life.
Very well said. Yeah. And inspiring. Like, yeah, no matter who you are, know yourself, find your community. I think that's so important. People don't always, we all need it, but we don't always think like, okay, am I in good community? Do I feel really connected to the people around me? Do I think we share similar values? Life gets so busy. Sometimes we work with people that we may not necessarily share values with, or whatever the case is. So it's important to make a note and check that. Like, do I feel in community? And if not, what are some ways that I can potentially find that? Groups, websites, there's many different ways.
Totally.
My final question for you, and I think you've touched on some of the ways, but from your perspective, what do you think we can do, even just on an individual level, to start moving forward and doing our part in creating a more sexually well society?
I think self acceptance is key. Sometimes it's very hard to accept other people if you have a very hard time accepting yourself. And that's not to say you don't deserve love through your hard moments. And there's that saying is don't love other people if you can't love yourself, because I believe everybody deserves love. And sometimes you don't feel like you deserve it. And that's when you need it the most. So it's very powerful to love people when they sometimes feel like they can't. And a lot of that is that self-acceptance of that you have the ability, you have that power, you have that influence of like, I can love someone and they feel really down right now and I can just show up what they need. I don't need to tell them what they need, right? I can ask them questions. There's a lot of curiosity. So I think a lot of the change will come through curiosity of, well, how can we make this better for more people? Not just for me, not for people who look like me. How can we make this better for sex workers? How can we make this better for people who want to access sex workers? How can we make this more acceptable as a society? It's just like, yeah, normalizing that sometimes people hire people to do things with them and that's okay and that's their choice. They agree that this is what they want and they know what they're getting into. So yeah, it's a lot of that curiosity and being humble that you're not going to know everything. I don't know everything. No one knows everything, but just the willingness to learn, I think, is important.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.